Hey guys, today I'm going to talk about upgrading Active Directory domain services from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2. Now, this is not a complete guide, or it's not like a complete how-to kind of video which can tell you about upgrading Active Directory domain services from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2. Since every Active Directory domain is unique and different, I would highly recommend to read the documentations from Microsoft website. See if they are applicable to your environment. So before you upgrade your Active Directory domain services, you have to take care of all the prerequisites. Now in my lab environment, I'm going to do a simple upgradation of Active Directory domain services from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2. This is just a very basic simple lab setup. All I have is two domain controllers which are running Windows Server 2008 R2. Alright, let's see how we do it. Okay, this is highly important. As I mentioned before, you have to read this official documentation from Microsoft before you upgrade your Active Directory domain services. It contains all the information about what you need to do to upgrade and the process for upgrading your domain to Windows Server 2012 or Windows Server 2012 R2. It talks about the upgrade steps, things such as new features in Active Directory, domain services, deprecated features, and behavior features related to Active Directory domain services. What are the system requirements, upgrade paths, required functional levels, interoperability matrix, FISMA roles, and other things. So please read this. Okay, here's how the upgrade process must be followed. First, you have to assess and then plan and then test, and finally you have to deploy your upgrade process. So you start by assessing where you are today with your Active Directory infrastructure. Specifically, you need to document your current architecture, design, and sizing. Where, how many, and how big are your current domain controllers are. You also need to research and document your dependents. Find out which application in your environment depend on Active Directory, what applications run the business, and what dependency they have on Active Directory. You need to find them all. And then you need to discover and document your current domain controllers configuration, any non-default configurations that you need to carry forward, and how they might affect you. Lastly, you have to build an inventory of applications or services that are running on your DCs. Next comes planning your upgrade. Now think about where you're going and what you have to do to get there. So you need to use your assessment data to drive the plans. Specifically, you need to decide which version of Windows Server you are going to install on the new DCs, whether it's going to be Windows Server 2012 or Windows Server 2012 R2. So you need to determine whether you are ready for this new version of Windows, and you might have to check this by building a test environment, and then you need to document your desired architecture. Are you going to carry your current architecture forward? Do you have the right number of DCs in the right place of the right capacity? And then you need to decide if the type of DCs you'll deploy will change. Like, are you going to install read-only DCs or virtual DCs? Should they play a role in your new infrastructure? So you need to research which of your dependents are compatible with these new type of domain controllers. And also you need to determine the application and client's dependency against the new domain controllers. More importantly, you need to plan the sequence for introducing the new DCs. Where will you start and how quickly will you introduce them? Lastly, you need to sequence the retirement of your old DCs. So you need to plan how you're going to migrate other services off of your old domain controllers. And you also need to plan moving the IP addresses or host names from your old DCs to new DCs if it's required. And then comes the test phase. Ideally, you have to test every proposed changes. practically you need to determine what you must test and what you can test and how you'll test. In some cases, you'll test in a lab. In other cases, you may have to test in production. You really should test schema extensions and other changes made to the Active Directory database using AD-PREP, because AD-PREP is irreversible. And you need to decide which applications or clients that depend on Active Directory need to be tested. Also, you need to test your migration plan for other services like DHCP, WINS, or IaaS that may be running on your current DCs. And then finally comes the deployment stage. Now that you have done your homework, you need to phase your deployment into stages. You need to prepare the Active Directory database for the new DCs using AD-PREP. You need to deploy the first domain controller running the new OS, and then you'll deploy the additional domain controllers, and then finally you'll retire your old domain controllers. And then finally you can think about upgrading domain functional levels and forest functional levels, and also you can think of implementing the new features that Windows Server 2012 R2 Active Directory Domain Services is going to offer you. So this is how you should do it for any production environment. But in my demo environment, I'll not be following all these items because it is just a lab environment. Alright, the next thing that you have to decide is the migration paths. Now you can use two migration paths when it comes to upgrading your Active Directory domain services. The first path is, of course, you upgrade your down level domain controllers to newer OS. And the second path is bring in domain controllers running newer OS, which means you bring in Windows Server 2012 domain controllers into the environment and then move your FISMA roles from the older DCs to the new DCs, and then you retire your old DCs. This method to bring in the new domain controllers running newer OS is the most convenient way of upgrading your Active Directory domain services. And also in my demo environment, I'll be using this migration path to upgrade the Active Directory domain services. Alright, so let's talk about the prerequisites. Now the first step, obviously you have to make sure your domain is healthy, so you need to run DC diag, and if there's any problem with them, you have to fix them first. And the next step you have to do is you have to make sure your domain and forest functional levels are set to Windows Server 2008 R2, and then you have to locate which domain controllers have your FISMA roles. And this is important, you have to take a full backup of your domain controllers just in case if you want to restore if something goes wrong. And then you have to check your schema version of your Active Directory domain services before you run the AD-PREP. And then you'll run the AD-PREP on your Windows Server 2008 R2 domain controller using Windows Server 2012 R2 ISO. And then you'll check the schema version of your Active Directory domain services after running AD-PREP, and then you'll promote your Windows Server 2012 R2 servers as an additional domain controller. Following which you'll verify whether your 2012 R2 DCs is listed in ADUC under Domain Controllers OU, and whether they are listed as a name server in the DNS Manager console, and whether they are listed in servers under appropriate site in Active Directory sites and services. After that, you'll transfer the domain-wide FISMA roles to the new domain controllers. You'll also transfer the forest-wide FISMA roles to the new domain controllers, and you'll verify that your new domain controllers are running the FISMA roles. And then you have to check the IP and DNS configuration of your new DCs. And then you may have to remove your 2008 R2 domain controllers from the global catalog server role, and then you'll demote them. And if required, you can raise your domain and forest functional level to Windows Server 2012 R2 to make use of the new features that are provided by Windows Server 2012 R2 Active Directory domain services. Alright, here is my lab environment. I already have domain controllers running Windows Server 2008 R2 which is DC01 and DC02. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in two more servers running Windows Server 2012 R2. They are DC03 and DC04. I'll make them as additional domain controllers. I'll then transfer the FISMA roles from my old DCs to the new DCs, and then I'll retire my old domain controllers running Windows Server 2008 R2, which is DC01 and DC02. So DC03 and DC04 have just been joined to the domain, but they have not been made as additional domain controllers yet. Alright, so let's demo this. So the first thing, you'll make sure your domain is healthy by running dcdiag, and if there's any problem, you'll fix them first. Alright, so I've logged into DC01 as a domain admin, and I'll open command prompt and I'll run dcdiag. Alright. Okay, it has some DFS events, warnings and errors. It says it has some DFS replication warnings or errors, so I'm going to ignore them. Apart from that, it looks like everything is okay. So I'm going to run the same command on DC02. Alright, everything looks to be okay. Okay, the next check is to ensure your organization's AD, forest, and domain functional level is set to Windows Server 2008 R2. So before you install a Windows Server 2012 R2 domain controller into your existing domain, the forest and domain functional levels should be set to Windows Server 2008 R2. Alright, I'm in DC01. I'm going to check the domain functional level by opening Active Directory users and computers. Alright, I'll right click on Active Directory users and computers, go into All Tasks, and I'll click on Raise Domain Functional Level. It is already set to Windows Server 2008 R2. In my case, I've already done this. That is the reason why it's already set to Windows Server 2008 R2. So let me close this. If it is showing anything less than Windows Server 2008 R2 as the current domain functional level, then there will be a drop down where you need to select Windows Server 2008 R2, and then if you click the raise button, you'll be prompted to click OK, and then your domain functional level would be raised. It does not require a reboot of the server, but if multiple domain controllers exist, you have to allow some time for the changes to replicate throughout the domain. And replication time required could vary from 15 minutes to 4 hours or more, depending on your network design. Now verifying the forest functional level is done in the same way. Again, I'm on DC01 and I'll open up Active Directory Domains and Trusts. Alright, I'll right click on Active Directory Domains and Trusts and I'll click on Raise Forest Functional Level, and you can see I've already set the forest functional level to Windows Server 2008 R2. Again, if the current forest functional level displays anything earlier than Windows Server 2008 R2, then you need to select Windows Server 2008 R2 from the drop down menu, and then once you click on raise button, you'll get a confirmation box where you have to click OK, and you have to confirm that the change is permanent and it will affect the entire Active Directory forest. So you have to click OK again when prompted that raising the forest functionality level completed successfully. And just as when raising the domain functional level, you don't require any reboot of the server. As always, when making domain architecture changes, if multiple DCs exist, you have to allow some time for the changes to replicate throughout the domain. Alright, after making sure that our domain and forest functional levels are set to Windows Server 2008 R2, we now need to locate the FISMA roles of your domain. So I'm in DC01 and I'm going to open up command prompt and I will type in netdom space /query space FISMA. As you can see, DC01 is holding the forest-wide FISMA roles, which is schema master and the domain naming master, and DC02 is holding the domain-wide FISMA roles, which are PDC emulator, RID pool manager, infrastructure manager. Okay, now we'll make a note of this in a notepad. All right, as the next step, we'll take a full backup of my existing domain controllers, DC01 and DC02. I'm in DC01. Let me open up computer, and I've already have two drives, one that contains the OS and the other one will be used to back up my domain controller. This is also same with DC02. So let me start backing up my domain controller DC01. Now by default, Windows Server 2008 R2 doesn't have the Windows Server backup feature installed. So I am going to install it. So I'm in Server Manager, I'm in Features, so I'm going to click on Add Features. I'll scroll all the way down and I'll select Windows Server Backup and I'll click Next and I'll click Install. Windows Server Backup features have been installed, so I'm going to click Close. I'll click Start, go into Administrative Tools, and I'll click on Windows Server Backup. I'm going to click on Backup once. By default, the different options have been selected, so I'm going to click Next. I'm going to say Full Server, which is going to back up all my server data, applications, and system state. I'm going to click Next, and I'll select Local Drive, and here I'm going to select Backup Drive, and I'll click Next. It says that the backup D drive will also be backed up, so it's asking me if I want to exclude this from the backup items, so I'll click OK and I'll click on Backup, and it's starting to back up. Alright, the backup has been completed on DC01, so I'm going to click Close, and let's check on DC02. It looks like it has been completed. I'll close this. Alright, so we have completed the backups. Now the next check that we have to do is we have to check the schema version of ADDS before running the AD prep. So back on DC01, I am going to open registry editor and I'll go into HKey local machine, system, current control set, services, NTDS, parameters. Alright, so if I select decimal, I can see the current schema version, so I'll make a note of this. Okay, the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to run the actual AD prep on our Windows Server 2008 R2 domain controller using the Windows Server 2012 R2 ISO. So I am back in DC01 and I've already mounted the ISO file. So I'm going to go into command prompt. We'll change the directory to support folder. And here you can see the AD prep folder. So let me go into AD prep and I can see the exe file. So I'll come back here and I'll type AD prep space / forest prep and I'll press enter. Alright, so you'll see a warning message. So basically it says that all your domain controllers should be running Windows Server 2003 or later, and also it says that the schema version, once it's upgraded, it cannot be reversed. So I'll type C and then I'll press enter to continue. You can see the current schema version is 47 and it's going to upgrade it to 69. Alright, so it's going to take some time to upgrade the schema. Alright, so you can see that the AD prep has successfully updated the forest wide information. So I'm going to come back into registry editor and I'll refresh this and you can see that the new schema version is 69. Alright, we have checked the new schema version of ADDS after running AD prep and now it's at 69. So I'm going to go into the next step, which is actually promoting the Windows Server 2012 R2 servers as an additional domain controller. Alright, so I'm going to log into DC03. This will be the first server. I'm in DC03 and I've logged in as admin, and I'm going to go into Server Manager and I'll click on Manage and I'll click Add Roles and Features and I'll click Next, Next again, Next. I'll select Active Directory Domain Services, click Add Features, click Next, click Next, click Next, and install. And I'll do the same thing on DC04. So I'm going to log in as domain admin. I'll open up Server Manager. I'll click Manage, Add Roles and Features. Let me select Active Directory Domain Services, Add Features, Next, 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 Install. Let me come back to DC03. Alright, so the installation has succeeded and it says the configuration is required, which is nothing but I have to promote this server to a domain controller. So I'm going to click on this and I'll say add a domain controller to an existing domain, and I've already specified the domain name and also the required credentials to promote this server as domain controller. So I'm going to click next. So this is my site name, and this will be a DNS server and a global catalog server as well. I'm going to type the directory service restore mode password and I'll confirm it and I'll click next, and I'll ignore the delegation warning and I'll click next. So I'm not going to install from a media. Instead, I'll specify a domain controller that can be used to replicate from. So I'm going to select DC01 and I'll click next. I'm okay with the paths. It says that to install the domain controller, the wizard needs to perform the following operations, which is domain preparation. In my case, I've already done this, so I'm going to click next. And if you want, you can review the options and I'll click next. It's going to do the prerequisite checks. Alright, so it says all prerequisite checks have been passed successfully, though it has some warnings which can be ignored. So I'm going to click install. I'm going to do the same thing on DC04. I'll click promote this server to a domain controller and I'll click next. I'll select add a domain controller to an existing domain, and the domain name has been specified as well as the credentials. So I'm going to click next. Also, this is going to be a DNS server as well as global catalog server. So I only have one site name, which is Contoso, which has already been selected. I'm going to type the directory services restore mode password and I'll confirm it again. I can ignore the DNS delegation warning. I'll click next and I'm going to replicate from DC01. I'm okay with the paths. If you want, you can review the options. I'll click next. It's going to do the prerequisite check. Alright, all the prerequisite checks have been passed successfully with some warnings and they are ignorable. I'm going to click install. Let me come back to DC03. It seems like it has already promoted DC03 as a domain controller and it's rebooting now. Alright, DC03 is up and running. Let me log in. And if I click tools, I can see all the management tools used to manage Active Directory. Alright, it looks like DC03 and DC04 have been promoted as domain controllers. So let's look at the next step, which is to verify whether your new 2012 R2 DCs are listed in Active Directory users and computers under domain controllers OU. I'm back in DC01 and I will open up Active Directory users and computers. I'll expand my domain, go into domain controllers. I can see DC03 and DC04 have been added. The next step is to verify whether they are listed as name server in the DNS Manager console. So again, back in DC01, I'll open up DNS Manager. I'll expand forward lookup zone and Contoso domain. I can see DC04, but I'm not seeing DC03. So let me go into properties. Alright, that's fine. It may take some time to show up here, or else you can manually add DC03 by clicking add and typing dc03.contoso.local, and I'll resolve, and there you go. Click apply. Alright, I can see them all. The next step is to verify whether these new DCs are listed in servers under appropriate site in Active Directory sites and services. So back in DC01, I'll open up Active Directory sites and services, and under my site, under servers, I can see DC03 and DC04, and if I try to replicate, it replicates fine. Okay, the next step is to transfer the domain-wide FISMA roles to my new domain controllers. So I'm going to go back into DC01. I'll open up Active Directory users and computers. I'll click on Change Domain Controller. So I'm going to select DC04, and I'll right click again on my domain. I'll click on Operation Master, and for RID, I'll click on Change, and it says, are you sure you want to transfer the Operation Master role? I'll click yes. I'll click OK, and for PDC, again I'll click Change. I'll click yes. The role has been successfully transferred. I'm going to do the same thing for infrastructure. I'll click Change. I'll click yes. Alright, we have successfully transferred our domain-wide FISMA roles to the new domain controller, which is running Windows Server 2012 R2. The next step is to transfer the forest-wide FISMA roles to new domain controllers. I am back in DC01, and I'll open up Active Directory Domains and Trusts, and I'll right-click on Active Directory Domains and Trusts, and I'll click Change Active Directory Domain Controller, and I'll select DC03, and I'll click OK, and I'll right click again, and I'll click Operations Master, and I'll click Change, which will change the domain naming master role from DC01 to DC03. I'll click yes, and it is successful. I'll click OK and close. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer the schema master role from DC01 to DC03. So on DC03, I'm going to open up command prompt, and I'll type regsvr schema management.dll to register schema management DLL to open up Active Directory schema management. So I'm going to click on OK, and I'll go into run again. I'll open MMC, and I'll click File, Add or Remove Snap-in, and I'll add Active Directory schema, and I'll click add. I'll click OK. I'll right click on Active Directory schema, and I'll click on Change Active Directory Domain Controller. So I have to transfer from DC01 to DC03, so I'm going to select DC03. Now I'm going to ignore this message where it says that the snap-in is not connected to the schema operation master, and you'll not be able to perform any change. Any modification that you need to do can only be done on schema FISMA holder, which is still DC01. So I'm going to click OK on this. Again, I'll right click on this, and I'll click on Operation Masters. So it says the current schema owner is DC01. So I'm going to click Change. It says, are you sure? I'll click yes, and I'll click OK, and I'll click close. So now DC03 is the new schema master. So once completed, you have to open up Active Directory users and computers and verify that the Active Directory database successfully replicated to your new Windows Server 2012 R2 computer. Be aware that the database replication may take some time depending on the number of objects in Active Directory. Alright, the next thing, verify your new domain controllers are running the FISMA role. So for that, you'll come back to DC03 and go into command prompt and type netdom query FISMO. Okay, so you can see that the forest-wide FISMA roles are being held by DC03, and domain-wide FISMA roles are being held by DC04. Now the next thing that you'll do is you'll check the IP and DNS configuration on your new DCs. Alright, so I'm going to open up Network and Sharing Center. I'll click Change Adapter Settings, and on my network adapter I'll go into Properties, open up IPv4 Properties, and for the preferred DNS server I'll make this server as the preferred, and for the alternate I'll make DC04 as the alternate DNS server. So I'm going to click OK. Click OK on this. I'll do the same thing on DC04. So let me log in. Network and Sharing Center. Click Change Adapter Settings. Go into the network adapter. Open up IPv4. And for the preferred DNS server, I'll make this server as the preferred 4. And for the alternate DNS server, I'll make DC03 as the alternate. I'll click OK, OK. Alright, the next step is to remove the 2008 R2 domain controllers from global catalog server role, for which I'm going to go back into DC03 and I will open up Active Directory Sites and Services. I'll expand Sites, and my site name, let us expand Servers. And for DC01, I'll right click on NTDS Settings and go into Properties, and I'll uncheck Global Catalog. I'll click Apply, and I'll do the same thing for DC02, which is also a global catalog. I'll uncheck Global Catalog, click Apply, click OK, and I'll force the replication. Replicate now, 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 replicate now. Alright, the next step is to demote the old Windows 2008 R2 domain controllers. Okay, so I'm back in DC01 and I am going to open up Run, and I'll type DC promo. I'll click Next. Now you should not check this option because this is definitely not a last domain controller in your domain, so I'm going to click Next. I'm going to type the new password for this server and I'll confirm it again. Alright, so you can review your selections. So it's going to remove Active Directory domain services from this computer, and when the process is complete, this server will be a member of the domain. So I'm going to click Next. I'll say Reboot on completion. So I'm going to do the same thing on DC02. I'll click Start, Run, type DC promo. I'll click Next, and I'll not check this option. Click Next. I'll type the new password for the server, and I'll click Next, and I'll click Next, and I'll select Reboot on completion. Let me come back to DC01. So it has been completed. So I'm going to log in again. So now it's a member server and not a domain controller. DC02 is coming up, and if I go into DC03 and if I hit refresh, you can see DC01 and 02 have been removed from the domain controllers OU. And if I come into Active Directory Sites and Services, DC01 and DC02 doesn't have the NTDS object, so I can safely remove this or delete this. I'll click Delete. I'll click Delete. And if I open up DNS Manager and go into contoso.local, I don't see DC01 and 02 as a name server, which is good. And I'll again force the replication, and you can see that there is a stale object which has not been removed automatically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that and hit delete. Alright, so I'm going to replicate now. This is good. And let me come into DC04. You can see a stale object of DC02 on DC04. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to replicate DC04 from DC03. I'll hit replicate now. I'll click OK. All right, now back to DC01. You may still see that the Active Directory domain services and DNS server role is still there with red error. You can go ahead and remove the roles, and also you can remove the server from the domain, and you can put that server in the work group. So I'll click roles again, and I'll click remove roles. I'll click next, and I'll uncheck Active Directory domain services and as well as DNS. I'll click next. And you have to make sure that all the clients configured to use this server for DNS server, including the servers, must be configured to use a different DNS server. Now the way usually we do it in a production network is that we are not going to remove the DNS entries or the host names used by DC01 and DC02, but instead we'll assign the same host name and the IP address to DC03 and DC04 in the DNS manager, so that if you have more than 1,000 clients and 1,000 servers, you cannot go and manually change the configured DNS servers on them. So that is how you do that. So I'm going to click remove on this. All right, it has been removed, but it requires a restart. Now, before I restart, I want to change one more thing, which is the configured DNS server on this server. I'll open up IPv4, and the preferred will be DC03 and alternate DNS server will be DC04. I'll click OK, and I'll click close, and I'll say I want to reboot now. Let me check on DC02, which is still coming up. So after you do all these things, you have to ensure that your clients, your servers, and your applications which are dependent on Active Directory are still able to log into the domain. So you have to ensure that. Now the next thing that you'll do is you'll raise your domain and forest functional level to Windows Server 2012 R2 if required. So I'm back in DC03, and if you want to raise your domain functional level, go into Active Directory users and computers, right click on the domain and click raise domain functional level. So currently the domain functional level is Windows Server 2008 R2. If you want to make use of all the new features of Windows Server 2012 R2 domain functional level, just go ahead and select that and click on raise and click OK, and it is done. Now if you want to change the forest wide role, so go into Active Directory Domains and Trusts and right click on Active Directory Domains and Trusts and click on Raise Forest Functional Level, and the current forest functional level is Windows Server 2008 R2, so you'll select Windows Server 2012 R2 and you'll hit raise and you'll click OK and hit OK. Alright, so you're done. You're now running on the newest forest functional level and domain functional level, which is Windows Server 2012 R2. Alright, so this is how you upgrade your Active Directory domain services from Windows Server 2008 R2 to Windows Server 2012 R2. Again, this is just a basic implementation of how you do it. Like I said before, every environment is different and unique, so you have to read the Microsoft documentations to see which items are applicable to your environment and which are not. Now please do that, and I wish you'll all have a happy upgrade process. Thank you for watching this video. For more videos, please subscribe to my channel.